Welcome. My name is Vincent Rossi. I'm the coordinator of the Untitled Historical Society Speaker Series. I'd like to welcome you today for our September program. I'd also start with first asking you all to either turn off or silence your cell phones. Really sure to note that down. And I'd also want to give a shout out to our board for getting some new soft chairs, which some of you are And I'd also like to note about our next program, which will be October the 13th. October is Family History Month, and our speaker will be Peggy Rossi, who, in addition to being our archives manager here at the museum, is also a professional genealogist who helps people archive their own personal lives, and she'll be speaking on preserving your family photographs and documents. And she's been a very popular speaker, and I may be a little prejudiced about that. I know that people really enjoy the program. I also want to shout out, you'll see on the table there, we have a schedule which we just received from Pace TV, which will be airing a program about our museum 3 times this month on various cable channels. You can see a reference to the particular channels there on the gift shop table there. I thank them for helping us to publicize our efforts. Let's see, another shout out. Another member of our audience was Ruth Hilberg, noted artist and writer, and I'm very happy to have her in the audience today. Welcome. Today's speaker, Don Harrison's resume includes a political science degree from UCLA, decades of journalism experience, including writing and editing for AP bureaus in New York, Sacramento, and LA, 8 years covering politics for the San Diego Union, over a decade as editor and publisher of the San Diego Jewish Press Heritage. Since 2007, with his wife Nancy, with co-editing with his wife Nancy, he's the co-publisher of the San Diego Jewish World, online Jewish newspaper. He has helped all of us rediscover the important role played by Louis Rose as a pioneer settler in San Diego. And I can personally vouch for that, owning his book, having read it and enjoyed it, and I'm in the process of rereading it because I think that any good historical biography has many layers of insights, and this is a fact-filled book about San Diego's history, but also has something to tell us, historical lessons to give us about city-county history, American history, European history, world history. They all are intertwined and in a very well-written book, and I highly recommend it. And there are always lessons to be learned, and I'm looking forward to getting some more lessons today. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Donald Harrison.
Thank you. Before I start, I'd like to introduce my wife, Nancy, who I feel about her just the way he feels about his wife. So she's my co-publisher, and she's also back there because those of you who might be interested in purchasing any of these books, we have some for sale, and 25% of anything we sell will be donated to the Historical Society to help things along here. The books that we'll be talking mainly about Louis Rose, and he was the first Jewish settler in San Diego and quite an entrepreneur, and I'll tell you those stories in a minute. And the other books I've written since then, this has been a while since I wrote that one, I may not remember everything. You live here on the I-15, so you might be interested in this book. It's called Schlepping Through the American West. And I took my grandson, who's now 17, but at the time he was about 13 or 15, up the I-15, and we followed it all the way up to the Canadian border and stopped here and there to find stories, and then came back. And this is a collection of stories along the I-15 and back. And then finally, people said to me, gee, you wrote about the 15, what about our freeway, the 8? So this is a story called 77 Miles of Jewish Stories. And what I did is I followed the Interstate 8 from its beginning at Mission Bay to the Imperial County line, a distance of 77 miles. And I said every exit that I'm going to get off at, and there are 35 exits, I'm going to try to find a Jewish story. And I did. There are 70 Jewish stories in this thing, and at least one at every one, and some of them, like College Avenue, where there's all sorts of stuff. A few bit more. So those are the books here. And now let's talk about Louis Rose. He was born in 1807 in a little town on the Elbe River. Those of you like military history think of the Elbe River immediately as where the Russians and the Americans met at the end of World War II. But he lived in this little town called Neuhaus an der Oster. And it's important because he grew up thinking about water and navigation and shipping. Okay? And eventually he moved first to New Orleans. Got to New Orleans in about 1840. And the Mississippi River, once again, is a place of incredible navigation and trade and commerce. And eventually he made it out to San Diego. And instead of finding a lot of shipping and commerce and trade, he found a little town under the Presidio. Now, at the time that the Presidio was founded, it made a lot of sense for the Spaniards who came here, because they had three criteria for where do you put a town, or where do you put a settlement. One, it should be up high. Why? Why would they want it high? Anybody? Safety, right? Anybody comes attacking and shoot down, whatever. The second thing, they wanted it to have fresh water supply. And those of you who live in the Presidio and Old Town know that the San Diego River, particularly at that point when it was still a kind of a wild river, would go right by the Presidio, so they could get fresh water. And the third reason was that they wanted to find the natives, indigenous people who they could convert to Christianity. And the Kumeyaay Indians were in that area. They had a couple of villages. So as far as the Spaniards were concerned, this was the best place to start the city, right? But when Louis Rose came here, he said, what kind of place is this? Why are we so far from the water? Because, you know, he understood that a city should be a place that trade could come to. And so he started thinking, maybe, someday we could move the city from this area that we call Old Town today to the bay, to San Diego Bay, where the ships would come in. So remember that. Anyway, he came here, and he opened up his first business. He got a little hotel that he started. It was called the Commercial Hotel. And it wasn't a very comfortable hotel at all. In fact, they used to put the prisoners in it. You know, and the prisoners said, please, any place else, we confess. No, it was not very, very nice. But it was on Juan Street, probably just before you came into San Diego. If you were coming from Los Angeles, and if you were to be coming on Juan Street, you would find this light commercial hotel. And he also had a saloon.
Come on, take your seat.
And from there, he kind of spread out, and he opened a general store, and he was a very successful businessman in Old Town San Diego. But meanwhile, the city was having its problems. And what I tried to do in this book was, instead of just writing about the Jewish community, which some Jewish histories do, and they kind of forget the general community, and then there are general histories that kind of forget the Jewish community. I thought maybe what I could do was show how the two interrelated. So I decided to follow Rose's career because Louis Rose was very, very much involved in the growth of our city. He didn't intend to, but this is how it happened. Some of you have heard of Sheriff Augustin Parashik. He is the founder, incidentally, since we're here, he was considered to be the founder of the California wine industry, but this was much earlier in his career when he was the sheriff here. And it was decided that the one thing that this new town of San Diego, which in 1850, when Lewis Rose arrived here, had only had 600 inhabitants, not counting the people who lived outside of the city, Native American villages, but 600 European inhabitants were here. And they decided that the thing that they really needed most was a jail. Right? Because I guess they didn't want to send them to Lewis Rose's hotel. And so they decided to put out a bid for the jail. And for some reason, the lowest bid did not win. And of course, they tossed out the highest bid. And the one that was in the middle was submitted by the sheriff, Agassiz Harashi, whose son happened to be sitting on the city council. And surprise, he got it. So he built this jail, and it became known as the Swiss cheese jail of the West. It had that many holes in it. I mean, you could get out of there, and in fact, its first customer, if you want to call it that, was the nephew of the mayor. The mayor's name was Joshua Bean. And his nephew, who became famous later in Texas, does anybody remember the name Roy Bean? Judge Roy Bean? So his nephew was living here, and he was involved in a scuffle, and they decided to toss him into the brand new jail, which they were very proud of. And he dug his way out of it with a spoon. That's how bad it was. And so they went to the sheriff and said, "Sheriff, someone can dig their way out. You know, it's not very good. It's not much of a jail. What are we going to do about it?" He says, "It's not my fault. It's not my fault. We don't have the right kind of lime and stuff that you need to cement these bricks together. And if you give me some more money, I'll build the jail right. But I need your help to do it." Well, the city didn't have exactly a lot of money. So what they did is they issued bonds to pay for the jail. And the bonds, if I remember correctly, carried, I believe it was 8% interest. You'll have to check me. It's been a while since I've written this book. 8% interest. Now, how many of you would like to get 8% interest today?
Yeah.
You would? Yeah? How about you, sir? Would you like 8%? Absolutely. But this wasn't 8% per annum. This was 8% a month. And it kept compounding and compounding. And eventually the city, which was already broke, went bankrupt. And now the state legislature stepped in and decided to revoke San Diego's charter and to appoint, or rather to call for the election of a 3-member board of trustees to fix this. Now, I would like to tell you that this was good government rearing its head, very concerned about us poor folk in San Diego. But actually what happened is Augustin Harashi had gotten himself elected to the legislature, and he wanted to make sure that he got his bonds paid off. Anyway, they elected a 3-member board of trustees, and after a few months, the board threw up its hands and says, "We have no idea what to do." And they quit. And now San Diego didn't have a government. And so a second board of trustees was elected. And on this board were Lewis Rose, James W. Robinson, and another fellow named Farrell. And Robinson and Rose had become very, very good friends because they were on the very same wagon train that came to San Diego from El Paso, Texas. They were best buddies and very different people. I mean, Rose was a European Jewish fellow businessman. Robinson had been the acting governor of Texas during the time of the Alamo. Well, sort of the acting governor. What happened was he was the lieutenant governor of Texas during the time that it was a provisional state, right? They hadn't yet seceded, completely left Mexico, but they were fighting. And there was a fellow by the name of Smith who was the actual governor. And then there was a legislature that had been elected. And the legislature and the governor didn't get along at all. In fact, they were fighting, and one of the reasons that the Alamo fell was because no one came to their help, because there was so much political fighting in Texas. Well, anyway, the legislature decided to impeach and get rid of the governor, and the governor decided to get rid of the legislature. And so, depending on which side you were, when the legislature impeached the governor, Robinson became the acting governor. But if you were on the other side, there was no legislature to do that anyway. And you can imagine what a mess it was, while meanwhile Santa Anna and his troops are converging on the Alamo. At any rate, Robinson had many other adventures. He was eventually appointed a judge and was known as the hanging judge. He heard that lawyers of one defendant who had been convicted were planning to file an appeal the following morning, and so he ordered the fellow hanged that night. He really had a colorful career. And at one point he was captured by Santa Anna's troops, and he was taken to Mexico with other prisoners at a prison in Perote. And Robinson eventually was able to meet with Santa Anna and said, listen, if you are willing to send me out of here, let me go. I'll go to Houston, Sam Houston, and tell him that Texas could be an autonomous republic if only you'll agree to that, and instead of this independence talk. And Santa Anna figured, why not? And Robinson came back and he made that proposal, and Houston pretended to play along like maybe he was interested. But what he was really trying to do was to get the United States government to worry that maybe Mexico was going to take Texas back and to admit Texas as a state, which was very controversial at the time because Texas would have come in as a slave state. This was, remember, the 1840s, and they wanted to keep the balance of slave states and free states. So Robinson kind of got in this, but he became very unpopular because of this gambit, because most Texans said, go back to Mexico, hell no! Right? And so he decided eventually he should leave town. And when he left town, it happened to be on the same wagon train ride that Rose was on. And that's how they became very, very good friends. So now this seasoned politician and this businessman are now 2 of the 3 votes on the Board of Trustees. And they always vote together. Farrell is left out in the cold sometimes. Sometimes Farrell votes with them, but it didn't matter because they controlled it. It became what I call in the book the Robinson-Rose era in early San Diego history. And if you go to the Old Town, how many have been to Old Town, San Diego State Park? All of you, I guess. The visitor center, you may know, is the Robinson-Rose building. And that's because Robinson built the house. And after he died, his widow, Sarah, sold it to Rose. And then about that time, Rose got married finally again. And he and his wife and his daughter lived there until he became too ill. I'll get to that later. At any rate, by the way, when they all got to San Diego after coming on the trail, this was kind of exciting for the 600 people in San Diego. I mean, you got the former governor of Texas, you got the first Jew that they had ever seen, and Sarah, Judge Robinson's wife, who had this beautiful red hair. So who do you think stirred the most interest of all? Anybody guess? Sarah, yeah, Sarah was the one. That's the other one who made the fuss over. Anyway, so now they have the problem of what to do about the crushing debt of the jail. And they said, hey, we're not going to pay 8%. They decided we're going to only pay 4%. And the people who held the bonds said, well, that's not fair. You know, we bought these bonds in the expectation that we would get 8%, and we're going to take you to court and sue you over it. And they said, all right, but meanwhile, we're not going to pay the 8%. We're going to pay 4%. Well, it was settled out of court, and eventually they were able to bring down the expense of paying back these bonds for this jail that still didn't work, right? But the only problem was that they didn't have any money to pay 4% either. So what could you do if you can't pay for things and you're a city council? More bonds. That's one possibility. But they didn't do that. No, they looked around, and the only asset that the city really had was land. Land that they had inherited from the Mexican government, Pueblo lands. And so they decided to auction the lands. And they held a public auction, and most people bought property in Old Town, or right around it. Well, that's where the city was, right? And, but Robinson and Rose decided they would do something different. Robinson was convinced that Rose was right about a city needing to be near the water. And so together they purchased land along the bay. But they were trying to assemble enough that they could create a new settlement along the bay, closer to the mouth of the bay where Ballast Point is. All right, and additionally, Rose decided he would buy some land somewhere else. And again, this is all public auction, so everything's on the up and up. You know, he didn't, rig anything or so forth. He decided to buy land in an area that was called La Cañada de las Vegas. Anyone speak Spanish here and want to correct me? Oh, good. Well, it means the Canyon of the Mares, M-A-R-E-S, female horses. And he purchased this area, which eventually became known as Rose's Ranch, Rose's Canyon, and today Rose Canyon. So Rose Canyon is on the I-5. Most of you probably know it. Just as you're starting to come into San Diego, around Morena Boulevard, that area there, and up to say La Jolla, that area is Rose Canyon. And it was there that Louis Rose built a tannery. Now, the reason he bought a tannery is because leather goods were almost impossible to buy. They were so expensive, even though this was you might say, the capital of cowhides. It used to be that, in fact, San Diego was the place where you would get the hides at the hide houses. Any of you who've read history of, say, Richard Henry Dana, who wrote about his 2 years before the Mass, talked about coming into San Diego to Ballast Point. Everybody know where Ballast Point is? Yeah. Ballast Point is where the submarine base is today. It's a little spit of land that Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo claimed San Diego at, and we do it every year. But at Ballast Point, they would stack up these hides from the cattle, which were plentiful in San Diego, and people would purchase them, and it was known as the California dollar. I mean, that's what it would call, it's one hide, $1. It was perfect. So you would think that we would have had a tannery before then, but we didn't. So what happened is these hides would be shipped all the way or down to the bottom of South America and then back up to the east, where they would be tanned, and then eventually would come back. Well, you can imagine how much that would add to the cost of your purse or your saddle or your belt or so forth like that. So Louis Rose, being an entrepreneur, said, I'm going to build a tannery, right? And he had a nephew who knew about this stuff, and they built the tannery there. And being a thrifty man, a smart man, he said, well, if I'm going to have a tannery, I might as well also have a butcher shop, right? Because, so he also had a butcher shop in Old Town San Diego. So as you can see, here's a guy that really took advantages of opportunities for business. Eventually, the suit was settled after the auction, and they were able to pay off those bonds. So then Louis Rose, by 1853, they decided to have a county board of supervisors. And the people who were members of the city board of trustees automatically became members of the county board of supervisors. And so if you go to the county administration building, you'll see that the first county board of supervisors included Louis Rose. And what did he do? He was very much involved in laying out routes for roads. And so the I-15, for example, was very much under his purview, along with the 8, and they didn't call it that, but basically had to figure out ways of going from San Diego north, straight north, San Diego to the northwest, San Diego out to the east, and so forth. And so Rose was very much involved in that. And so if you say, what the heck does any of this got to do with Rancho Bernardo history? I think that's the sliver I can give you that he helped or authorized the road building right past your homes here. Now, Rose Canyon, some people, if you're a geologist, know it as the Rose Canyon Fault because there's an earthquake area there. And I just want to stress, because I'm a fan of Louis Rose, that it's the Rose Canyon Fault, not Louis Rose's fault, okay? He didn't do it. He didn't do it. So he had his tannery, which eventually he had to sell. And afterwards, he started working on Roseville. Roseville was essentially a portion of what we today call Point Loma. And along with Robinson, that he started working at, Robinson died. He decided to purchase Robinson's holdings from Sarah in Roseville. And in 1869, laid out the town site that became Roseville. Roseville, it runs about 30 blocks along the bay, and goes back about 8 blocks into the hills there. And today, the Liberty Station. How many have been to Liberty Station? So many of you. Liberty Station is, on one end of Roseville. Recently, a plaque was put up at the bottom of Womble Road, which also is where the high-tech high school is located. And if you follow it all the way to the end, you get to a boat channel. And there sits a plaque honoring Louis Rose as the founder of Roseville. And it faces the bay. This is a boat channel, but it faces San Diego Bay, which we thought was very appropriate because that was always his dream, was to bring the city to the bay. Now, unfortunately for Rose, there came along another entrepreneur who was much savvier and who bought really a lot better land in terms of expansion, and that was Alonzo Horton, right? And so for a while, Horton and Rose were rivals, and along with the Kimball brothers, who lived down in National City, and all three of them were trying to make their areas the capital, you might say, of San Diego. Rose lost, Kimball's lost, Horton won, and the city as we know it today ended up where it is. But it was a very interesting time because while they competed, they also cooperated. Because San Diego's great dream was to attract a railroad here. Because we had this gorgeous bay, deep water bay. It could handle all kinds of ships. But unless you could connect the cargo from those ships to something, right, it didn't do any good. So San Diego really wanted to be the great entrepot, the great depot for the West. And when later on, when the Panama Canal opened in 1915, the big fair was held to show off what a wonderful city we were, what a great bay we had. But we weren't able to get a transcontinental railroad for several reasons. One, to the east of us were the Carrizo Gorges and places like that. It was a great challenge for railroad builders in terms of bridging gaps and grades and that sort of stuff. And the other thing was that the folks up in San Francisco, which considered themselves the real California port, didn't want the competition from San Diego. And some powerful interests were involved in trying to block the railroads, trying to block a railroad directly into San Diego. And it took a long while before San Diego actually got a spur. And by the time that happened, Rose was had already passed on. So that essentially is a quick overview of Louis Rose and the impact that he had on San Diego. Roseville, Rose Canyon, Robinson Rose House, Rose Creek in Rose Canyon. Various places today are named in his honor. And the politics of his time are very, very interesting about how the city developed itself and the role that all of this happened. So, let me take, if I may, any questions, either about Rose, about the I-15 or the I-8. And yes, ma'am.
I want to get that straight. Judge Roy Bean was the nephew of the mayor?
Mayor of San
And he
Diego.
was in jail for what?
For like a day or two. Well, it was not very long. He
Okay.
dug out.
What
Oh,
did he
it
do?
was an altercation, you know. That
Oh, okay.
it wasn't that serious.
Okay.
Yeah. And Judge Roy Bean was a hellion when he was a kid. And he was kind of a hellion when he was older too. Yes, sir.
Did Rose practice his religion or bring anything to the town about Jewish
Yes.
traditions?
Yes. Thank you for asking that. Rose, when he first came, of course, he was the first settler, and it took a while for enough Jews to arrive to really create any kind of religious community. We need 10 people to pray, called what's called a minyan, at least to pray publicly. We can pray privately by ourselves. And it took a while before there were that many Jews there, but eventually they had many of whom were successful merchants who have very interesting stories to tell themselves. In 1860s, Rose donated the land that became the first Jewish cemetery. Now, it's not there anymore, and it has an interesting story. It's in his area, Roseville, right? And if you promise not to tell the people there today, I can tell you that it sits under the Sharp Cabrillo Hospital. I tell you that because I don't want, keep it quiet. We don't want to discourage those patients. But actually what they did is they exhumed all the people, including Louis Rose, and they moved him to the Home of Peace Cemetery over there on Cemetery Hill on Imperial and Market Avenues. You know, and that's where he's buried today, along with other pioneers. But he did give that. He was a lay leader, actually conducted the wedding, performed the wedding service for some other Jews that lived there. And he helped establish the Hebrew Benevolent Society, which took care of, like, you know, let's say if a Jew came to town and died, someone needed to bury him, you know, that would be what they would do. And finally, he hosted in his home at the Robinson Rose House in San Diego High Holy Day services. We're coming right up, in fact, on the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah. And back in the 1860s, they had their services at his house, Rosh Hashanah services. So yes, he was involved, and he was familiar with Judaism. It's interesting, some people say, where did the name Rose come from? And those of you who are Jewish may know that in pre-Napoleonic days, Jews typically named themselves after they were the son of their father. So if you think of your Bible, it was Isaac, the son of Abraham, or Jacob, son of Isaac, you know, Yaakov ben Yitzhak, right? And so he of course had a Jewish name, and his family had Jewish names. And Napoleon, a relative of Napoleon who was given authority over that part of Germany, joined Napoleon in offering to the Jews full citizenship of Europe, you know, as Europeans, if they would only change their names and take family names, because they were so hard to count in the census because all the names sounded alike. You know, it was really confusing. You know, Abraham, Abraham son of Isaac, son of Abraham, Abraham son of Moses, you know, blah blah blah. You know, and so they wanted names that they knew how to handle. And so Jews typically took 4 kinds of names in this particular period. One were names after things in nature, and that's what the Rose family did. They looked around and, oh, Rose, okay, and became they became Roses. Others took the names of their trade, like Schneider. Schneider means tailor in German, right? Others took the names of the town that they lived in, like Hamburg. They became Hamburgers. And others took patronymic names to what they already had. They became Abramson or Jacobson or so forth like that. And so that was the most common way that people responded and became citizens during the Napoleonic era. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am, and yes, sir.
The old jail, is it where that jail site in Old Town is now? Is that where that original holy jail was that everybody escaped?
Yeah, it's, I think so, that the one that they have down on San Diego Avenue was supposed to be where the original jail was, which would have been quite a bit, fairly far from the courthouse.
Yeah.
And you notice if you go to the courthouse now, they have this steel box that they, where they held defendants while they're awaiting, sweating the confessions out of them. But, I mean, the jail didn't stand for very long because but that's one of the details I just can't remember. But unfortunately, the jail was falling apart. Yes, sir.
And Rose was also involved in starting the first Masonic order, I believe, or was...
Thank you for remembering that. See, he's a good reader. He had been a Mason in perhaps in Europe, but definitely in New Orleans. He joined a German-speaking lodge, and when he came here, he joined. They started up the Masonic Lodge about the same time that he came in 1850. I think it's San Diego FNM 35. I think is the number. If any of you are Masons, you may know this. And so he became a member of it. Robinson became like the worshipful master and stuff like that. Rose always had kind of a lower profile position, but he was a leading ultimate. Yeah. And his daughter, Henrietta, he had one daughter who survived, and she lived to her late, I think, 80s, and was a teacher at Roosevelt Junior High School right near Balboa Park. She became the president of the Eastern Star, which is the female affiliate of the Masonic Order, and she was the president in 1901 of that. So, yeah, they were both over the Masons. Yeah. Yes, sir.
And how much of a role, you talk about the rivalry between San Francisco and San Diego about the railroads, was LA involved in that too?
Yeah, LA was kind of a creation in terms of the port of San Francisco. I'm sure people in LA would hate to hear this, but in the sense that San Pedro was not a port, it had to be built. And so when the railroads decided that they weren't going to come here to this beautiful port of ours, they had to come somewhere to have a southern transcontinental route. And so they fastened on Los Angeles, but they really had to dredge out a harbor and create a place, but it was not a natural harbor such as we have. And LA grew from there. Had they figured a way to bring the railroad here initially, our city's future would have been dramatically different than what it is. So there are many people who love San Diego the way it is now, and thank God that Los Angeles got the transcontinental railroad. So, well, let me at this point then, if there are no other questions, thank you again, and let you know that this book, the one about Louis Rose, that runs $19.95. Again, 25% of that will go to as a donation to the society. This one here about the Interstate 8, which are kind of fun stories about different stops along the way and some of the odd things that you might see. And this one about I-15 all the way up to Canada. This one's also $19.95. That's $14.95. If any of you would like them, there's Nancy. And if anyone would like me to sign any of them, I'll be also delighted. And I want to thank you very